notion here, what we're looking at here is just starting to get to thinking about how we tell stories and how we engage readers, but also how telling stories and writing stories are super related, but also very, very different. We don't have the benefits of body language, and when we talk to people, we can do things with sentences that we wouldn't be able to do when we're writing them, because we can use voice inflections and pauses and things like that, all of which you have to create with language. But it's worth thinking about. And the reason we bring it up is when you're talking to, especially when you're working on something like what we're doing here, when we're working on a story, and when you spend time over the next few days or weeks, and you're talking and you're telling friends of yours what happened yesterday at the mall, or you're talking to your sister or brother or your parents, start to take notice of how that process of sharing experiences, these are real experiences, but nevertheless, how it occurs in a conversation, how language is used, how it's employed, how you pick up on signals from the person you're conversing with, so that you know how to adjust the storytelling in order to accommodate what they might not be understanding or what they're curious about. All things you can't do when you're writing. Now, the reason why it's important to think about this and to take note of it is that when you start to do that in conversation, and then you sit down to write, you're sort of more aware of what you have to provide a reader in order for them to have the same kind of engagement that a person who's talking to you might have. And this is something I always say to writers when they're trying to create stories, et cetera. It's like, all right, so now, take a step back and think, what does your reader need from you in order to fully appreciate what it is you're trying to communicate? Often that has a lot to do with small things like making sure that you're creating a fuller sense of the setting, or that you're including the setting in dialogue, or that you're, adequately orienting or re-referencing setting or details or weather or time of day in the description of action or the description of a setting, in order to make sure your audience is completely aware of where they are and what's going on. So these are actually really kind of hard things to do. That's why writing is not second nature. Speaking is second nature. Conversation is second nature. That doesn't mean you're good at it. I'm not that good at it, but it's still second nature. You don't have to do a lot of thinking about it in order to accomplish it. Writing, you have to do a lot of thinking about it. So this is just something to be aware of in the next few days or weeks as you begin to write more and more about, from invention, from imagination. Notice what you're doing when you speak, because it'll help you write a fuller and more engaging story. That's for sure. Okay, so that's just part of what we're talking about here in this lesson. What we're going to be looking at is all the ways a bunch of different writers come to terms with what I just said, how they're going to somehow communicate complicated, sometimes abstract notions to a reader when all they have is language on the page. So we're going to see a lot of different examples, and the idea of these examples that we're going to be looking at, most of which are the beginnings of novels or stories, is to get you thinking in terms of your options as a user of written language. That's all. I'm not saying you're now going to be introduced to 25 introductory structures and you must memorize them and have them available so that you can use them at your disposal. That's impossible. But when you're aware that there are options and you start to take note of them when you're doing your own reading, that's how we begin to learn from our reading and learn from our everyday lives what's useful in our writing. So that's what we're going to be doing a little bit right now. So its structure, as it says here, it refers to how a written text is organized. But that's oftentimes very hard to name or describe structure. You can do it, but more important than sort of, like I said, categorizing a bunch of written structures is just knowing that there are so many options available to you that you can always come back to something that you don't feel as strongly about and just come up with an entirely new way of structuring the language, the storytelling.